Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into a really fascinating high-energy tactical guide. We're ripping into the Sentinel Leaks manual to see exactly how actionable OSINT, that's open source intelligence, is being leveraged by street-level organizers right now. So let's strip away the political rhetoric, okay? We're just going to focus purely on the tactical facts documented in these recently surfaced public records and independent archives.
It all starts with one absolutely critical question. How do you actually spot a covert surveillance vehicle? The sources we're examining today totally bypass mainstream coverage to break down exactly what an invisible enforcement network looks like when it's literally parked on your street. Because, well, if you know what to look for, the invisible suddenly becomes visible.
But to really understand the Watchers, you first have to wrap your head around the massive scale of the national detention infrastructure. Documented by the Autonomous Archive, we get this macro-level view showing a decentralized yet highly interconnected landscape. I mean, you can't really understand local street surveillance without first understanding where the targets are ultimately being routed, right?
And what's wild about this network is just how structured it is. It's like a giant puzzle. States are actually categorized into distinct operational tiers. You've got your Tier 1 mega hubs, Texas, Georgia, and Louisiana. These are the national epicenters, relying heavily on massive facilities and private contractors. And then you have the Tier 2 states, places like Arizona, California, and Florida. These act as strategic corridors for transfer routing and staging. It is a highly organized logistical grid. Section 1. Spotting the Watchers. Let's zoom in from that massive national map right down to the neighborhood level.
According to the Sentinel Leaks TOSV manual, that stands for Tactical Operations Surveillance Vehicles, federal agents rely heavily on unmarked vehicles rather than foot patrols. And, it makes sense. Foot patrols draw attention. Using a covert fleet lets them operate, observe, and execute operations while just blending right into the everyday traffic of your neighborhood. So, let's look at the actual hardware. The covert fleet is mostly made up of ordinary-looking SUVs, unmarked sedans, and even rental minivans. Based on the Sentinel Leaks manual, you really need to be paying special attention to standard government fleet SUVs. Think Chevy Suburbans or Ford Explorers with super subtle markings. But importantly, you've got to be highly aware of plain white Ford Transit vans. Those, along with Chevy Express vans, are absolutely everywhere, which makes them the perfect urban camouflage for transport teams.
This all builds into a really practical identification strategy. It's a rapid-fire mental checklist. You aren't looking for what's there. Actually, scratch that. You're looking for what isn't there. These omissions are totally by design. No decals, no ICE or DHS lettering, no police striping, no emergency roof lights. Toss in heavy tinted windows and standard civilian license plates, and boom, you have the classic profile. The manual specifically notes this lack of markings is standard operating procedure for their 2025 operations.
But hey, spotting the vehicle is only half the battle, right? You have to spot the behavior. Surveillance tactics often involve unmarked sedans or SUVs just idling for long periods of time. If you see an ordinary-looking Ford Explorer idling for hours with a clear, uninterrupted line of sight on a workplace, a community center, or an apartment building, you are likely looking at a stakeout. It's all about recognizing the pattern of a vehicle that just doesn't fit the natural rhythm of the neighborhood.
So you memorize the vehicle profiles. You look for the tinted windows, the heavy suspension, the missing plates. You think you know how to spot the Watchers. But according to the leak, the real threat isn't the unmarked van. The real threat is the masked operator stepping out of it wearing a local police uniform. The manual claims ICE agents are now actively impersonating local cops, knocking on your door without a judicial warrant because they know you'll open it for the local PD. It describes a calculated, unconstitutional bait and switch.
And this bait and switch, it isn't just a localized glitch. A recent investigative report by Crust News reveals that this is a sweeping, federally funded program operating right under our noses. It basically takes the infrastructure we just discussed and completely merges it with local law enforcement.
1,904. That is the exact number of memorandums of agreement signed under Section 287G of the Immigration and Nationality Act. That covers 39 states and 2 U.S. territories. So what does this legal clause actually do? It effectively turns local sheriff's deputies into federal enforcement officers. They get a short training course, access to federal databases, and suddenly they have the power to issue detainers.
Now, what makes this current iteration of the program so fundamentally different? Well, just follow the money. Crust News emphasizes that the recent expansion is uniquely dangerous because of the financial incentives.
Previously, the federal government just covered training in IT infrastructure. Now, they are paying local police full salaries, overtime, and, this is the crazy part, direct performance bonuses tied to immigration arrests. It creates a direct profit motive for local cops to act as federal watchers.
The Crest News report frames this legal clause perfectly. They call it a colonization of local law enforcement. They describe how the federal government is effectively building an invisible army out of small-town police departments. When local police are financially incentivized to perform federal enforcement, the traditional boundaries of community protection are just completely erased.
Section 2. Archiving the public record.
When the local police become the watchers and unmarked Ford Transits idle in neighborhoods, what's the countermeasure? Well, the sources suggest that independent intelligence and rigorous public archiving become absolutely essential tools for community resilience. As the Autonomous Archive notes, these systems thrive in the shadows. They rely on abstraction. They want names reduced to numbers. Meticulously recording the data, logging those 287 G agreements, tracking the vehicles, that is how organizers resist that abstraction.
Take the ICE and CBP Custody Deaths Archive, for example. It's an ongoing project tracking all publicly reported deaths since January 2025. It is designed to endure, to force accountability right where the system attempts to hide it. This is exactly what it looks like to map the real-world consequences of the covert infrastructure we've been exploring today.
The Sentinel Leaks field guide I just broke down didn't come from the corporate press. It was aggregated by the archivist Ali Hart. Independent intelligence is how we keep our communities safe. Go to Ali Hart's Substack, drop a subscription, and support the creators building these survival grids. Link below. I want to leave you with this final thought to consider about the hidden infrastructure that might be operating within your own community right now. We've decoded the local police partnerships, we've mapped the detention hubs, and we've seen the unmarked vans. But when the line between local protection and federal enforcement is quietly erased, who is actually keeping watch over the watchers? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Stay observant, stay informed, and I'll see you next time.